There are 6 different types of communication. So there's inform. So I need to inform someone or a group. I need to persuade. I need to inspire. So I need to tap into the hearts and minds of those individuals. I need to entertain is another one. I need to activate is actually the word.
There you go. Yeah. Welcome back to the Wits Podcast. Once again, we have a wicked guest and a show today. We have Mr. Nick Kindler, CEO, keynote speaker, author, communication coach, eternal entrepreneur, and Nick is extremely passionate about innovation and communication. And today, Nick is head of programming at Singularity U Canada, a global learning and innovation community using exponential technologies to tackle the world's biggest challenges and build an abundant future for all. We are going to have a great conversation today about communication, the importance of prepping and planning for our presentations and meetings and interactions. We're going to learn a little bit about storytelling. You're going to give us a little bit about your opinion, and you might just share some examples and experiences along the way. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here. It's a real privilege and a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. And we were chatting earlier and I was saying, I've never actually sat down with another communication expert. And, I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Me too.
You're an amazing keynote speaker. You're an author, specifically a very extraordinary communication coach. You've been really practicing this in your own business and with clients for years. You're an entrepreneur. So I just want to wrap with you today and get a little bit of your perspective around things like what does it take to communicate well? What does it mean when we communicate towards our goals? I want to get some of your advice. I want to get some of your tips. And I know that our audience is going to benefit from it. So again, thanks for being here, man.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
All right, so let's start with the big question, communication, because communication is a big topic, right? I think in a lot of cases, this is where a lot of things go wrong in business, in leadership, in marriage, in parenting, and friendship, is miscommunication. So why don't you start with a little bit of what is effective communication? What does it take to communicate well? Just give us an overview of sort of the things we need to know about it. What is it and what is it not?
Communication can be so many things to so many people, and I think you've already kind of, even in your question, you outlined some of the things that it can be is, it can be wrapped up in relationships, it can be wrapped up in decisions and actions that we take in. Of course, it's very much, I'm assuming many of the listeners to your podcast and viewers of your podcast are leaders, so it's wrapped up in leadership. Right. I actually do believe that leadership is communication. So for us to have a strong communication foundation and ability in communication is going to be fundamental to our success.
Right. Agree with that totally.
So you asked a few things like what is it not? I think I would prefer to go on the positive, which is I believe that successful communication is grounded in purpose. And, and we can go down this rabbit hole if you want.
Let's go. Yeah.
But I believe
I love what you just said there, which is communication has a lot to do with purpose. And, I might use a different word, but keep going with that.
So I kind of look at vision and values and mission, and those were interestingly, used and still are obviously, and are very important to articulate for not just an organization, but for an individual. Right. And when I start working with clients, especially if they're feeling a little untethered, and I don't mean that from emotionally unavailable or unhinged. I just mean that they're feeling a little adrift or lost. We do sit down and articulate what their personal values are. It's amazing. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, like asking people, in one of your keynotes and your workshops, have you ever articulated not your company, but your personal values? Everyone's got their company values. They usually have them up in the boardrooms or whatever, but in their personal values, rarely do people take the time to articulate them.
Yeah, why do you think that is? I mean, why do people have such a hard time focusing on themselves versus when the business comes and says, here's the values, we could all jump behind that?
It's the same reason why, why does the shoemaker's kid have no shoes? Yeah. And why does the communication agency fail sometimes at delivering the best communication to their team?
Right.
we do have a terrible time at introspection and self-reflection. We often are so busy at ensuring, and I can attest to this, ensuring that our clients are successful. I mean, it means a lot to me to have a successful client, to see them succeed on stage, or have them come back to me and let me know how something went and that they were positive is very positive. But so there's a rigor that we apply to our customers that we don't always apply to ourselves. And why is that? I wish I had an answer. I'd like to say that we just, for whatever reason, don't put ourselves up high enough on the priority list, if you will.
Yeah, I think prioritization is part of the issue. So let's come back to personal values. I mean, how do we create personal values? Is it creating a personal value statement that you help people with?
Look, it's not rocket science.
Right.
I really don't think it is. It's
not rocket science, but it's extremely difficult to do, and I think that's where people take these things for granted, which is
absolutely. What I'm saying is, it's actually, from a process perspective, you can go online and find a list of values. Right. Like literally, if you Google a list of values, you'll find either a page or a coaching site, and I'm not going to promote my site. It really doesn't matter. You can find a list of values. And so if you look at that list of values, you're going to find dozens probably that appeal. But really, by process of elimination, if you stop and look at them and start to circle the ones that appeal to you, so either print it out or write down the ones, and you might have a dozen values by that point. And then you start to look at the correlation between the ones that are left. If you can get them down, meaning you see that integrity and trust are very, very similar. They're very different words, but they're similar in their connection. Then you start to be able to look at, well, these are the things that the values that appeal to me. And so once you have that, you're one step closer, in my opinion, to being able to start articulating your actual purpose as a leader. We talked about purpose as leaders, and I talked about values, but purpose can be really helpful as a leader of a business. It can be helpful as a part of a business, as what's my purpose within this division, as a leader within this sector, or in your home, as a leader in the community, as a father, as a mother, as a brother. There are all kinds of things that you can actually begin to articulate your purpose. And once you do that, things start to kind of feel a little easier.
Yeah. I have a client, a CEO of a very large organization that has spent the last 5-6 years developing something called the purpose-driven strategy within their organization. And it's an old concept, and I said, where do you learn it? And I think the book was called The Story of Purpose. He's been at this for a long time. And I was chatting with him a couple of weeks ago, and I reached out to him to say, I'm working with a client right now, and they're in a senior leadership position, and they're trying to create purpose and clarity within their team and organization. I was like, I got to tell you about this guy I know, and he's done this, but he's done it with like 30,000 people. And it doesn't matter who you speak to in the organization around the world. You ask them, what is the purpose of the organization? Clear as day. But what they've done is something even more impressive, which is instead of just keeping this a corporate exercise, they've launched an internal purpose-driven strategy course or training or coaching for any individual in the organization that wants to discover and learn their purpose. And he said it so boldly. He says, sometimes we put like the team member through the course, and it's volunteer. Like anyone can do the course. Doesn't matter what position you're in the company, whether you're in the factory or whether you're in corporate office, whether you're in Asia or North America, you can do this course. And sometimes what this course or this coaching does is it brings someone up to the level of understanding what their purpose is, and their purpose misaligns with the organization. And at first I thought, wow, maybe this is problem. He's like, no, that's the best thing. That's the best thing, because the gift we gave this individual was an opportunity to go fulfill their purpose. Because the cost to us as a business obviously would have been tremendous to keep someone who's not motivated to be part of it. But I thought that was absolutely brilliant. And what you were just saying now, purpose just doesn't sit corporately. It sits within your role as a family member, as a father, a parent, for say, a sibling, as a team member, as a community, as a neighbor. Purpose is important, man.
In the 1970s, if you look at the exponential growth, meaning the adoption of mission and vision statements, so that people could understand they didn't feel like they were automatons in large organizations as they grew, right? So they didn't feel like they connected to the organization. So they said, let's create a vision and a mission for the organization. Yeah. What I found was that the embrace of the word purpose in organizations is also going through an exponential change. Yeah. And because I believe that part of what's happening, and we're seeing it, is the automation and the lack of self-reliance on human. Meaning we want to make humans better humans. Right. So how do we make those humans better humans when they're not needed in the actual workplace anymore? And so this idea of purpose is fundamental to the next stage of work development, growth, and economic growth.
Right. And I think what purpose does too is if we use the evolution of mission and vision, because you remember those days you'd walk in those old corporate offices and there'd be the posters of soar like an eagle, right? Successories, right? But I think that was also in a lot of regards to create alignment from an industrialization standpoint for work, which let's get everyone in, sitting in sort of, these positions like the factory, we're going to get them to work. Now, eventually that turned into you can't just hammer people anymore. You can't just get them to show up and say, you better punch in. This was before HR. It was called the personnel department, right? Which is like, okay, we got people in the business. And this is where the saying started to come up of look after the people will look after the business. Yeah. But it was still corporatized. It was still always used as a tool to get people to work. And I think what's very cool about purpose, the individual is driving the control of the purpose or the direction instead of the organization defining what the purpose is. And man, this is cool. I've never looked at purpose like that, which is the connection between mission and vision in the 70s versus in today's world in 2020, plus moving forward, it is about purpose.
It's one thing to understand what the big faceless organization of the past or the current is and their purpose is and how I fit into that purpose. But then how do I articulate my own purpose? So your client and their purpose-driven organization, the fact that they could literally let every single employee articulate their purpose is fascinating to me. I have a 3-step purpose practice, which allows you to articulate your purpose for communication.
All right, so walk us through that. Tell us what the 3 steps are for the...
Sure. The first step is we need to articulate what kind of communication it is. And by the way, I'm looking at this from I need to share something. I need to communicate something in a business setting. Identify what kind of communication it is.
Cool. And what are the different types of communication? Is it as simple as like this is a business thing versus this is my daughter or kid?
There are 6 different types of communication. So there's inform. So I need to inform someone or a group. I need to persuade. I need to inspire. So I need to tap into the hearts and minds of those individuals. I need to entertain is another one. I need to activate is actually the word.
There you go. Yeah.
And so there are these different types, and they can be combined, by the way.
For sure.
And so that's the first step is like look at what it is that you think that you need to share or want to share, and literally get them to fill in. And then potentially even combine.
Cool.
Second step in the 3-step purpose practice is actually articulating the what, the how, and the why of the communication. The what is the topic. So it's usually about a subject, and you want to do something about this subject. You want to engage in a particular way around this subject. So we could say, for example, communication is a subject that we could talk about as the what. The how is action around the subject. It is all about moving that subject forward or that topic forward in a unique way about your perspective around that subject. It's usually got action and verbs oriented or within. So if communication is our topic or our what, then, and I've said this in one of my talks, communication is hard work. and often taken for granted.
Right.
So
It's so funny you said that, man, because I was just sitting here saying, like, shit, this is hard. This is really hard. Like, you go to someone and you say, hey, just go say something. Well, you know why you can't say something? Because you have to do all of this stuff. This is, like you said, people take for granted.
Why is it's not the third step, it's the third part of that second step, which is the future you want to create. It's the output. And so communication is hard work, but it can be learned. And if you do, you can make the world a better place. And the third is connecting them.
Yeah.
How do you connect your what, your how, and your why? And I call them language lures. And these are just connectors. It's today I want to talk to you about what. And then your how can be used as a connector with and or but. And then, of course, you can use all kinds of connectors with to connect the why. So today I want to talk to you about communication and how it's hard work, but it can be learned and can help make the world a better place. And then you edit it all down, right? Yeah. Get rid of all those connectors and turn it into a whopping power purpose statement.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that's the purpose practice.
Which is really good because, again, if it's besides sort of giving you your purpose, it's actually giving you some tools to communicate well with. And I love what you said is communication is a learnt, I'll just paraphrase, communication skills is a learnt behavior or skill.
Absolutely.
People think you're born with the gift of the gab or you've just got the personality to do it. But no, great communicators learn how to communicate. We learn how to express our feelings. We learn how to articulate our ideas and thoughts. We learn how to communicate it in a volume that allows the other person to receive it, because communication has a lot to do with listening.
The communication skill as a learned skill is something that we do take for granted. That, again, going back to the work you do and the courses that you're teaching, they're fundamentals that you're sharing with people that truly help them become better leaders and better people. I believe that we do take it for granted. And most people, when they have a presentation to do, especially during the times we're in right now, they will not do much except maybe put a deck together. Mm-hmm. Maybe, right? Maybe. They won't rehearse it. They won't think about how they're going to present it. They're going to do what we say. What is the word that we all say? We're winging it.
Right.
I'm going to wing it.
Right.
Do you know what winging it comes from?
Yeah, I've butchered a couple keynotes and presentations. But I go, I know my topic. I'll just stand up and wing it.
Well, we're all guilty of it, by the way. I've done it too. But what winging it comes from is from the theater, right? And in the theater, you have the wings of the theater, which is where the actors wait behind on the side of the stage. And the understudy, not the star of the show, but the understudies would wait in the wings just for that chance that perhaps the main actor or the star would not feel well enough to go. I watched it happen when I actually saw Hamilton in New York, which was a huge deal. I took my daughter. Mm-hmm. The person who played George Washington, came out. The next scene, completely different actor. So that guy got to step up and take the role.
Cool. So that's the winging it.
They're winging it. They're getting to come in. But those people who are winging it, they've been rehearsing for this. They're waiting for their moment. What we're doing is we're not waiting for a moment. We're just throwing all caution to the wind. Can you imagine if that guy came out as Washington and just the whole show started to fall apart because they were just winging it?
Wow. I think that's one of the greatest things that I've heard in a long time. And I love what you just sort of clarified for people, which is winging it requires preparation, practice, rehearsal. And without that, there ain't no winging it. You're just fucking it up.
Yeah, I think what people say when they say winging it, what they hope to be able to do is improvise. Mm-hmm. And improvisation is extraordinarily important, but you can only do great improvisation when you know your stuff. But when we're talking about true artistic improvisation, when we look at Miles Davis or look at Jimi Hendrix doing the Star Spangled Banner, for example, how could he do that? He knew the instrument. It was a part of him. He knew the song. He knew every note. He knew every beat, so that when he did go all over the place, he could always come back to where he needed to be. That's what great improvisation does. And that's where only when you know your content can you actually wing it.
And that's not just in a presentation form. That's in a meeting. That's in a thing. I talk a lot about this, which is, the importance of planning, which is we plan for all the useless shit in our life except the important stuff. I make a joke that you plan to go to the bathroom each morning. Right? You wake up, you schedule it, you have your coffee, so whatever you do, right? You make the plan and then you go to the bathroom, or you plan your drive to the office or the drive to your destination.
Yeah,
You're like, I have to go to a meeting tomorrow. I have to come. I'm doing a podcast. All right. What time am I going to leave? What should I wear? What's traffic going to be like? What direction I should take? Just think about how much effort you put into just driving here. Now you got to go have a conversation. You got to go have a conversation with someone that you work with. Someone on your team, a boss, a client, and everyone goes in, I'll wing it, right?
Yeah.
And it's the worst. This is where everything starts to go wrong and back to misunderstanding and miscommunication. Man, Nick, that was probably one of my moments this year, which is learning the difference between winging it, the true definition of winging it, and improv. Because I'm a big fan of improv. But it's one of the things I learned is you could only improv and do well when you actually know your content.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of fundamental to the coaching that I do. Here's an example. When one of the leaders that I work with says, I'd rather not focus on it, but I've got to do a panel at Money 2020, or I've got to do a panel at Elevate, or whatever the conference is. I say, why don't you want to? Well, it's just a conversation. We don't really need to rehearse that. Mm-hmm. And I'll say, in all fairness, it's actually more important that you rehearse what you want to say in order to capture that moment that when you're on stage, your purpose shines through, your content shines through, your thought leadership shines through. Right. And so we will, it is kind of monotonous, right? You have to look at the messaging, you have to come back down to it, and then you have to pretend that you're having this interview well in advance. Now, I'm not saying that you memorize your content. I just want to be really clear. Yeah. Memory comes later if you're doing a keynote. There's great benefits to memorizing passages, and because the authenticity is very important. If you're starting to sound like you're reciting stuff, you lose the humanity of it. I think that we need to know our stuff, know what we want to say, and practice it.
Right.
And then, in a way, forget it.
Right.
Because it's going to come back to you. It's imprinted in your memory.
Right.
Now, when I say forget it, I'm not saying like wipe it out like Jerry Seinfeld did. He said, I'm never performing that old material again. No, I mean, actually relax and allow it to take its own way out and into the world. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to, remember the exact wording of something, you're going to start to sound like you're reciting something, and you don't want that.
Yeah. We call it script talk versus right talk.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Yeah. All days in presentation skills we used to teach us, which is, okay, write your script out or your presentation. Yeah. And you write it out, right? The problem is when you're trying to then deliver that after, it's artificial because you're basically sort of robotic and you're reading it. Yeah. Versus right talk is like basically bullet points that you put down. You take your whole paragraph and you break it down into a bunch of bullet points, and that gives you your reference for what you're talking and your scripting, right?
Absolutely.
So you're not having to read so much the paragraph versus knowing the main points you're trying to get across.
Yeah, and the one thing I'd like to point out about that is it's so bang on, and the challenge that many senior leaders have is those bullet points are handed to them.
Right.
And that's and this is kind of been an interesting journey for me as somebody who had a communications and events company, owned an agency, and worked with senior leaders, doing a little bit of coaching, but more on the communication advising and production. Mm-hmm. I would see come in to shoot a video, and we had would want to interview the CEO or the vice president, and the executive would be handed a piece of paper with all the bullet points. Mm-hmm. They'd look at it and they go, okay. And they'd circle if they were really good. They'd circle a few things, and but the problem is it now just became sound bites that they had to memorize, and it wasn't their language. And there's ways that you can take that content as long as they do the work, this is part of it, they do the work, they find the time, they think it through, they go through a process so that their ideas, their articulation comes out and it fits with the organizational purpose and values and the strategies.
Yeah, and you just said it there, indirectly, which is they were handed this sometimes as they're walking up, and there's no time to prep and plan and to rehearse and stuff. When you talk about rehearsal before, I remember it reminded me of a story of Tony Soprano, I forget his name, James... Gandolfini. He was on a plane flying from wherever, from, call it LA to New York, or whatever the flight was, and he's sitting in business class, and all of a sudden he starts going berserk, right? Getting really aggressive, screaming, like just being really blue. They treat you very differently in first class when you start to misbehave, right? They come up and they speak to you like an adult. They say, excuse me, Nick, is everything okay, right? If you're in economy, they come up to you and say, hey, sir, all right, pipe down. Otherwise, we're going to have you arrested when we get home. Anyway, they're all, Mr. Gandolfini, is everything okay? What's going on? Are you all right? And he had his headphones on and he looked up and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm in the midst of just rehearsing my lines for the next show.
Oh, awesome.
And he was in character and he had his headphones on and obviously got caught up in the moment and realized how loud he was. But he was rehearsing. And anyway, everyone in that sort of section thought he was losing it. But that is the example of rehearsal and really getting into it and practicing it and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a great story. He was such a great actor.
Brilliant actor.
And obviously so dedicated. Like I'd never heard about any of his prep. But it doesn't surprise me when you look at the product that he was able to deliver. Yeah, it's remarkable.
Well, look, I know as a speaker and as someone that teaches and trains and stands up in a lot of audiences, I do a far better job when I've taken time to prepare. And not that I need to learn my material. I know my stuff. Yeah. But I prepare for, all right, how long am I delivering for? What are my main sort of objectives here? Who's the audience right now? What stories am I going to tell?
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
And it's not scripted, but it's sort of chunked out, and I might sort of go off in some tangent some way. Yeah. But I find that I'm able to be way more clear and concise and effective as a communicator when I've taken that time to plan. And I think that's just what you've described right now, which is knowing all these tools is one thing, but planning on how you're going to use them is another.
Absolutely. And so, the other benefit that you have, Greg, is you've got probably the 10,000 hours of practice that many people don't have. If you're the head of medical affairs at a pharma company or a director of marketing, likely you've done a lot of presentations, but not the 10,000 hours that is required to, and I'm, borrowing from Malcolm Gladwell's book, but that allow you to get that comfort in your content. I also want to bring up something that, you touched on Gandolfini's preparation. But that preparation is answering a question for him, which is, how do I want to show up? Like when he walks onto set, and wants to start working, he is ready. And this is kind of fundamental to some of the work that I do, which is, how do we start to think like a performer?
Yes.
And start to act like a performer, and ask yourself, especially in today's world where a lot of us are on Zoom or Teams or whatever virtual environment we're presenting from, how do I want to show up?
Right. So important.
Yeah, it's a toughie. It's a toughie because it's hard. We're moving at a great pace. Right. A lot of people are overwhelmed, and they don't have time to plan and prep the way they want to. Right. So I think it's one of those, terrible conundrums, right? Like, we need more from our people. We're getting more because there's tremendous productivity happening right now, as we've heard. But the engagement level is questionable.
Yeah. Look, I think, I don't know if productivity has gone up just in general. I think productivity has remained consistent, but the work people have had to do to keep that consistent productivity is way more, because we are sitting at home. And look, I'm finding this in my own schedule, which is jumping from one thing to the next, like coming out of a training room, into a podcast, into a coaching session, into a meeting. It's hard to flip your brain, and that's kind of what's happening, I think, in some cases at home, is people might want to prep. We're living in this Zoom world, but I got my kids running around, and then I just got to do this. So again, what's really funny is we started this conversation around communication. It's really turning into the importance of planning and prepping, and at the end of the day, that's the secret. A client reached out to me, and they said, hey, can you teach our salespeople how to sell through Zoom?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I said. Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, fuck me, man. Like, really, it's not hard. But I'm thinking, what am I going to teach them? I'm not going to teach them how to sell. They know how to sell.
Yeah.
But I'm going to teach them how to prep. I'm going to teach them how to think about who they are showing up. I'm going to teach them about their background. I'm going to teach them about the different styles of, as you said, informing, persuading, entertaining, because these are the aspects.
How are they showing up? How are they showing? That's fundamental.
Because it's 80%. It's the 80-20 rule. Like 80% of success comes through preparation, 20% through the actual act or execution.
Yep.
Right? And people reverse that. They think I got to put 20% in for prep and then 80% is the meeting on Zoom.
Yep.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, I'll throw one more little tidbit in there around showing up, because I think once you've done all that, right? You know, my background, my lighting, my camera, I know how to use the tools. I've got my content. I'm set. Now, what about me as a person?
Right.
And I write this in my book. I remember having the privilege of being at the Banff Television Festival many, many years ago and watching an interview with Kelsey Grammer, a star of Frasier and Cheers before that.
Yeah. His name was Frasier in Cheers, right?
Fraser, yeah. And so, but years before that, he was an actor on the stage at Stratford in Othello.
Okay.
Playing with Christopher Plummer, Canadian icon actor.
Yeah. No, he is.
And he tells the story. He starts performing with Christopher Plummer, and Christopher Plummer pretty much manhandles him in every show. They're doing these shows in the matinees and evenings, and he's like picking up Kelsey Grammer and putting him over there, and as the character, pushing him around. And Kelsey Grammer is getting more and more agitated and angry every single performance. He's getting more and more frustrated until one day he loses it. He refuses to be pushed by Christopher Plummer, and he pushes back, and Christopher Plummer goes flying off the stage. And he comes back on, they finish the scene, he's like, this is it, I'm fired. Because he's a young actor at this point.
Right.
And from that point on, Christopher Plummer and him hit it off. There's no more. Now, this isn't about male ego, and this is not reason, but what it was Kelsey had to take the stage. He had to own his space. And we have to own our space. Even if we're doing an update on Excel or on Zoom or whatever, we have to own that space. So all the things you mentioned, and how am I holding myself?
Right.
How do I want people to hear and see me, so that in the same way, if I were to wander into a boardroom 5 minutes late, dropping stuff all over the place, spilling my stuff, going, I wish I could find my notes. No. That's not how we'd want to show up. We'd want to show up and sit and be there before everybody else got there.
Right.
All these kinds of things we would do.
Wow. That's the authority figure, the expert factor, right?
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, I got one more question, which is around storytelling. So what are some effective ways, or what are some tools people can use to create stories? What goes into storytelling? What tips can you give people?
Storytelling has tremendous impact on the human brain.
Yes, it does.
And so I work with a lot of scientists and academics. I call these individuals ingenious experts. They are individuals that are subject matter experts in their area of focus, but they're ingenious. They want to do things a little bit differently. They want to leave their mark. And a lot of these individuals are left brain thinkers, dermatologists, ophthalmologists, put an ologist at the end, likely they're a group that I'm working with. And so the idea of encouraging them gently to use storytelling is sometimes a challenge. So what I decided to do early on was present the science behind storytelling. Storytelling can impact 7 areas of the brain.
Okay.
The sensory cortex, for example, is activated, and this is based on a study in Language magazine, I believe, where they connected subjects to in a lab, and they measured the sensory cortex activity when they used words like he had rough hands or she had a nice voice, low to no sensory cortex activity. But if they used colorful language, not colorful like swearing, but language with emotional content, things like she had a velvety singing voice, or he had rough leathery hands, the sensory cortex would activate. You have 7 areas of the brain. When you start to tell stories, all 7 can activate. If you don't, you're just going to activate 2 areas of the brain. So the way I say it, do you want your clinic or your business operating with 7 areas or 7 divisions at full steam ahead, or only 2 looking at numbers and facts?
Yeah. So do you know which the 2 are that activate?
Yes, there's it's Wernicke's area and Broca's area. And then there's 5 other areas of the brain, which includes the sensory cortex and motor cortex, and I'm not going to remember all other areas.
Yeah. We use the saying, which is we think in stories, we feel in stories, we see in stories.
Right? Love it. Yeah.
So you could have that one too.
I love it. I love it. So once I get them on side going, okay, I get it. There's a science to this. There are lots of incredible storytelling methodologies, including one of the classics, which is The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell. And I actually don't use that. I find
don't use it either.
I love it from a reference point of view, but it's actually complex and it's harder to digest and harder to adapt to.
Right.
The one that is very easy to understand is the story spine. And the story spine is a model that was developed in the 70s by an improviser and playwright, embraced by a small little company called Pixar. And Pixar uses the story spine to develop every single movie storyline.
Wow.
Every single one. And it is simply this. Once upon a time, there was a character, and every day they did something until one day they stopped doing that something. So they changed it, and something changed, and so they did this, and because of that, they did this, and because of that, they did this. You can do that over and over several times until finally resolution. And you can put in a lesson or a moral after that if you want. Not necessary, but it's possible. Yeah. So, and if you look at any story, you can do that. And fundamentally, there are kind of 5 categories that come out of using that methodology to create the story, which is environment, characters, conflict, raised conflict, and outcome or resolution.
Yeah.
And so that's the methodology that I use to help tell the story. I have my own communication canvas to help get the actual content down, and then we marry the 2 together.
Very cool. Very cool. And the other thing I'd advise people is as you're developing your environment, your character, your conflict, raise conflict, and the outcome resolution / lessons lived, lessons learned is the more descriptive you are along the way,
absolutely,
the better.
Yes.
Right? And as you said, you gave the example, the velvety voice versus she had a great voice. Yeah,
a wonderful improviser and coach that I've worked with, Ian, used to say in some of the workshops that we delivered, he said, the tree, you came to the forest and there was a giant tree. Interesting. What's more interesting? A giant oak.
Right.
It's just a little more interesting. Right. So if we can get into the specifics, but even better, and I'm going to go one step further, which is as we talk about stories or integrate stories into our communications, if we can draw upon the personal, what happened to Greg? What happened to Nick? What happened to all of the folks in the room even? Mm-hmm. But if it's yours, you can draw upon the nuanced emotional impact that it had on you so that you can have an impact on the audience. Yeah.
It's probably why my stories do well. It's because I'm a lunatic and I've got these wacky stories and I'm like, all right, well, let me just tell you. Everyone's like, that was an amazing story. I'm like, really?
I do say that if you have ever had the experience where you've told a story in a social setting and it's fallen flat, it's because you haven't got all those ingredients, right?
Exactly.
And it's happened to me. Like I've been there. I'm like, oh, well, I've shared the story. I'm like, oh yeah, I think about it. I reflect. I'm like, yeah, I really didn't set up the environment, or I didn't explain context, or I didn't have any tension, the conflict or raised conflict.
Yeah. So just to define, so what is the difference between conflict and raised conflict?
Conflict is kind of the introduction to the barrier that is happening, and then the conflict,
like the raised
in an effort to overcome that conflict, it actually is raised.
Okay.
You know who was great at this in TV, on TV, was Game of Thrones.
Yes.
They would have a battle sequence where you're like, well, I'm pretty sure they're screwed. And then, oh, no, they're really screwed now. And then somehow we would have a resolution. Right. Sometimes they weren't. Yeah. Sometimes they were.
Game of Thrones was so good.
Yeah, good storytelling, right?
So
but
amazing
But it's a barrier that gets even more extreme.
That's great. That's really great. Nick, this was really interesting, dynamic, I think very learning and forwarding. I personally got a lot today, specifically from our conversation around prepping and planning and rehearsing and storytelling. And what's funny is we started out talking about communication. Right?
That's right. That's right.
We went down this journey, right? Which is fantastic. We call it the Story Spine. All right, Nick, you have got a book coming out. The working title right now is Impact. When do you hope to have this out, and what is the book about?
The working title, and again, it's a working title, is Impact, Simplify, Transform, and Perform Your Presentations.
Excellent.
And it's about helping people become better communicators. Cool. Some of the content that we've talked about here today is going to be covered, but it's really a guide. It literally will, at the end of every chapter, there's homework that people can, and steps that people can take, so that if they've got a presentation or a talk or any kind of communication, maybe they've got to deliver a speech at their son or daughter's wedding, they can prepare using this book. Awesome.
That's actually a big thing that, people prepare for all sorts of presentations, informal, like corporate, but then they get asked to do the wedding speech very cool. You run a bunch of programs, teaching people how to sort of develop their communication skills. Where can we find you, and what are some of the programs people should look at?
I just want to say I've really enjoyed the conversation today, and
it's been great.
And it's been super. I've learned a lot myself as well. In terms of, if you want to know more about my programs, you can go to kindlerandcompany.com. I have a Communicate with Impact Challenge. It's an 8-week challenge. We just finished one of the 8-week challenges. Another one is going to launch in January. Sign up online. And then there's a bunch of modules that you can take. All of the things that we've talked about, some of the things and many more, are available as self-driven courses that you can take. But you can find out all about them at kindlerandcompany.com.
Awesome. Well, we will definitely make sure your links are there. You are a gem. It was a real pleasure having you here. I think it was quite informative. You represent everything around making humans better humans. You now have an official hat, so you have to wear it. And Nick, thanks so much for being here, man. I really enjoyed this conversation as well.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me, and amazing podcast that you're creating. So thank you.
Awesome. All right. If you like today's show, don't forget to click that like button. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to share, and we will see you next time. Hey, I'm Greg Witz. Thanks so much for coming and checking out the video. If you like that video, you're going to love the next one. So I'd highly suggest that you click this video over here. And don't forget to subscribe and share.